Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Doing good. Getting ready for the move back west. I've been in New York for the past year, so wrapping some stuff up and then making the cross country trek with my dog and my husband. But super excited to be talking today. I've been doing a lot of conversations about the metaverse. I think everybody's talking about the metaverse, all of that, and then the
Of
future
course.
of identity management. So it's just nice to be part of a conversation, which is why I'm really excited to talk today about marketing in the LGBTQ plus community. It's a little bit of a divergence from a lot of the stuff I've been talking about lately, and something that's extremely important in my mind.
Totally agree. So let's begin. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. We have truly an exciting session for you all today. So before we begin, I'm going to start with who I am and why I'm here. I'm Arielle Russo, pronouns are she, her, hers. I lead community efforts here for Brand Innovators, and a huge part of this rewarding role means I get the opportunity to work with the most innovative leaders of today while facilitating crucial industry discussions like these. And as a member of the queer community myself, today marks an especially important conversation. Which brings me to the direct purpose of this session. Today, we will welcome innovator, marketing expert, and industry leader, Jonathan Roman. In addition to Jonathan's impressive track records at brands like Electronic Arts and Ancestry, and now his new role approaching with SiriusXM, he, like me, is a part of the LGBTQ plus community, and more so has led some super remarkable efforts to support all of the amazing queer identifying humans out there. So without further ado, let's begin. Welcome. All right, so we have a video for you first to play. I will let that play.
Hi, gay. Happy Pride Month. We are sashaying away with deals. This month at the Butter Shop, we're running a special deal. If you can prove that you're queer, you get 3 pints off your choice of creamed, chucked, or drowned butter. And if you do mouth stuff, you get 4. We love gay, and it's awesome. So come visit. And we also make candles now. Wouldn't a candle be nice for gay stuff? In the bedroom or just hanging out. Yeah, we wouldn't. Wouldn't your partner want butter from the original old maid's home? We've been making butter since 1945, and we've been accepting all people since the last 4 months. So yeah, we're gagging for you to come take a taste of Cecily's Butter Shop at Cecily's Butter Shop. My friend's mom, I think is gay, so we think it's cool. Turn it off, Willard.
I love this so much. So this is a content creator on TikTok that I love to death. And she put this out, I think, during this past Pride Month, this content. And I think this was a great video, which is why I asked to be kind of played to demonstrate, it's exaggerated, of course, but to demonstrate what certain brands look like when they are, jumping in during Pride Month, trying to celebrate Pride, and, the other days or months of the year, there's just nothing contributing to the LGBTQ plus community. So I absolutely love this content creator on TikTok, and this video, I think, is such a great way to open up this conversation.
100% definitely breaks the ice. And if that video is, not telling of certain brands during Pride Month, I don't know what is. So Jonathan, you have quite an impressive background working across some very well-known brands. And before we go into this conversation, can you dive a little bit into your story? Tell us a little bit about your journey, where you started, and of course, tell us about the series of events that led you to where you are today.
Sure, yeah. So out of college, my first job, and I love to talk about this just because, this kind of pertains to the topic we're talking about today. I worked for a Japanese green tea company, and I was a district sales representative, which was kind of a crazy job. I was located back in New York at the time, and I think I was just coming to terms with my sexuality and kind of who I was as a human being. And what I encountered on the job was, very different than kind of what I experience today in a lot of the companies I choose to work with, and a lot of the things that I've helped to build into some of these companies and really support. I had a lot of people that were not accepting of the LGBTQ plus community. And at that time, since it was located in New York and we had different people representing and going to different parts of New York, we had a lot of jokes about certain parts of New York that people covered. Back then, this was like more than 10 years ago, Chelsea was kind of an area in New York that was predominantly like kind of the neighborhood in New York. Now it's Hell's Kitchen. So that's kind of shifted over the years. But you would have people that made jokes about like kind of, oh, you're going to Chelsea. You better put on your hot pink Speedo if you want to sell some green tea today. Things like that, which really didn't allow me to bring my authentic self to work. I was really kind of afraid to be my true self. I had to do a lot of like masking, or, you know, if people were talking about what they were doing over the weekend, there was a lot of me either straight up lying and replacing, you know, I went on a date with a guy with, I went on a date with a girl, or just being like, I didn't do anything during Valentine's Day when I did, just to avoid the topic of conversation at hand. So it really impacted my quality of life. And from there, I kind of discovered an opportunity that was available working agency side. So that's when I got kind of my start agency side. I wasn't happy at that last job, of course, wasn't able to bring my true authentic self to work. And I had a friend who reached out to me about getting involved in ad operations over at GroupM. So joined that, kind of came in defensively, kind of the same mindset I had working at that green tea job. And then was amazed to discover how many people were part of the LGBTQ plus community that worked there. So I had direct interaction with people that were openly gay in the office, which was just so refreshing to see. And as a young marketer, me being able to go into an environment where I was like, oh, I can talk about, the date I went on with a guy, or somebody I was dating at the time, and a vacation we took, and stuff that everybody, I think, that isn't part of the community maybe takes for advantage a little bit. You don't even think about it. You're like, what did you do? I went on vacation with my wife or my spouse or my partner. And I had an amazing boss there. So this was like a big pivotal moment for me, who actually supported me when I came out to my parents. So my boss offered me her couch. She said, if something goes wrong, if your parents aren't accepting, like, you can sleep on my couch. Just made me very comfortable about being my true authentic self at work. So from there, I worked a number of years agency side, kind of worked for a majority of the big holding companies, supported a number of different clients, and got to see some amazing work on some of the Pride Month and LGBTQ plus focused campaigns that were done. And then eventually made my way brand side, working for Ancestry, which had an amazing ERG team there. And then Electronic Arts, which also had, it's voted one of the best places to work, I think, for the past 5 years for the human rights campaign organization. And I've always made it a focus of mine, especially when I moved brand side and I kind of was at a little bit of a higher positioning in these organizations, to join ERGs. And we're going to be talking a lot about ERGs today, and kind of how that impacts your marketing tactics and efforts. Just because I think about, where I was when I first started and joined the workforce for that one company, and how I couldn't be myself. And then where I am today, where I can be as loud and as proud as I want. I can wear all the floral pattern shirts I want without fear of discrimination. So I want to kind of be part of these additional parts of the organization that really make it a safe space and an open community for anybody and everybody that exists in these communities. So they don't have to go through the same things that I went through, more than 10 years ago when entering the workforce.
Thank you so much for that incredible background, sharing and being candid about your journey. Definitely, I'm sure, helpful for those out there listening. When you look back on your journey, it really tells the evolution of your career and how you were able to come into this idea and conquer this idea, bringing your full self to work. Can you tell us a little bit about, I know you touched about it a little bit, but what that means to you and how you were able to use that to come into your career?
Yeah, I think it is, it's a tremendous impact, and something that, it's funny, like now, and I just went through a lot of interviewing. When I left EA, I interviewed with a number of different organizations. And I think about, when I got to start my career, the questions I was asking when I was determining what would be a right fit for me. And today, and I think now, I really make it a large consensus of, if I'm joining an organization or not, based off of how I perceive how open and how like much of my true self I can be at the organization, outside of just like, is it a good fit for the role itself? So that's definitely a major portion. But I ask about ERGs now. I ask about, what are you doing? Can I speak to somebody? And there are a lot of great organizations that I recently interviewed with that they will set you up with somebody from an ERG just to say like, hey, if you want to meet with them, this won't be part of the like your scoreboard of the interview process, but just for you as a candidate, if you want to learn more about what we have as an organization from an ERG setup, what's available. That's something that's become tremendously more important to me, and something that I'm really looking at when I'm joining organizations. So that's been kind of a big deal, something that's shifted over the years, and something that is kind of one of those things that is a requirement for me when I'm working at a specific organization these days.
So I know we're going to be talking about ERGs in just a minute, but before we go into that conversation, I want to bring up this topic because for me, it's been something very difficult to overcome. Mm-hmm. But bringing your full self to work means overcoming the uncomfortable everyday pleasantries that our coworkers and peers may not be privy to. So how do you interact with people who can't fully see sexuality or gender expression in their day-to-day conversations? Can you give us some examples, and I know you've already have, of your own personal experiences on how you dealt with these everyday conversations and how both sides can be better at approaching these informalities on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I can get from both points of view as somebody that's like, the object of maybe somebody who's making assumptions, or in the reverse, how I speak to different folk that like maybe I've never met them before, or maybe it's my first time meeting them. I've really trained myself to use they, them pronouns if I don't have somebody explicitly giving their pronouns. I think that's a really big thing. And I've made mistakes. I've had to like kind of retrain my brain, because I think we all grew up in a world where you take a look at somebody and then you say they have masculine or they have feminine features. And then you basically try to clock them and you automatically assume they are a specific gender. And I think, now that there's a lot more awareness and a lot more conversation going on, I have trained myself to, even if somebody presents feminine or masculine or looks a certain way, like do not make that assumption. If anything, it's just nice to label everybody with they, them until you have an explicit kind of understanding of what they have for their preferred pronouns. So I love the advancements in technologies and organizations that have actually made that a little bit easier for people to understand too. So big kudos to LinkedIn for finally kind of putting pronouns under an official section. Everybody was kind of like hot gluing it together after their last names for a while, just because they didn't have that section. But you have a lot of ways now to figure that out, and you can always ask, right? Like if you want to know, like I think kind of how we open the conversation today, just giving pronouns, even if nobody asked for it, I think creating that sort of normalization when we're talking about pronouns specifically. And then in terms of things like sexuality, one thing that I experience regularly, which I really do not like, is people automatically assume that I have a wife. You're at sales conferences, or you're at conferences in general, or you're having conversations with people. And if somebody sees you're married or you're wearing a wedding ring, I lost mine, by the way. I have no idea where it is. It's been gone for 3 months. I need to find a replacement for that. But when people see a wedding ring and they just automatically start asking about your wife, or they're like, they're trying to make this casual small talk. And I know we're going to be talking about B2B. That's really important for those of you that are sales folk representing companies, and you're really trying to make those human connections with potential clients, right? So certain things like that, I think, when in doubt, always, don't be afraid to ask. And then if you are on the other end of that, depending on how confident you are, this isn't for everybody. Some people, they just don't feel comfortable doing this. Correct people. And if you are somebody who is an ally of that person, and maybe they don't have the confidence to stand up for themselves, you can jump in as an ally and correct somebody else on their behalf if you're in a conversation and they're introduced the wrong way, or if they make the wrong assumption, and things like that. So I think it's just important to get everybody to that place where they're inherently asking those questions up front, not making assumptions. But until we're there, it doesn't hurt to call somebody out and just be like, hey, you're incorrect, or kind of pulling them aside and educating them about, how they can be better at figuring those things out, navigating those waters, for sure.
Totally. I mean, I think the two largest learnings right there: don't be afraid to ask and don't assume. I can't tell you how many times I have played the narrative for far too long that I have a boyfriend, until it just becomes, it just comes out, and it's uncomfortable for everyone. So definitely important. And as we move into 2022, the conversations around inclusivity and diversity are, of course, more prevalent than ever. And when it comes to the queer community, marketers need to not only understand us, but connect with us. And this means both internally and externally. So that means the work to reach them and us must also come from within your own walls. So Jonathan, can you please talk about the importance of ERGs, what that stands for, and why you participate in them?
Yeah, ERGs, I think, are essential for organizations these days, as is kind of hiring somebody that specializes in diversity and inclusion, which you're seeing a lot more organizations creating specific roles for that. The reason I think we have a lot of these conversations, and a lot of people focus on their actual marketing efforts, and then maybe you have creative kind of folk talking about, how to creatively represent the LGBTQ plus community. I always like to advocate for ERGs, because throughout my career, they have been such an amazing resource, which I think many people may assume that it's this additional thing that organizations do for the comfort of their employees. It is that, and that is a tremendous benefit, creating those safe spaces for your employees, attracting top tier talent that is part of that community, and then having kind of those areas of people to do referrals and things like that. But I think it's also a great opportunity to act as a sounding board, and to, it goes into the hiring too. You hire more queer artists, you're going to naturally have that ingrained into kind of the advertising, the creative, the content that your companies are producing. But also, it's a great place that if you as a marketer or you as a creative lead are unsure, this is something I would always say is like, have people that authentically have experienced these things tell these stories and create these stories. But not all organizations can do that. So if you're partnering with maybe like an agency to help do that and stuff, or you're trying to design that yourself, ERGs are a fantastic resource to act as a sounding board, because if you are not part of those communities, you may be creating content that, like, maybe you've read a couple of online articles, or maybe you replicated advertisements you saw in the past, but things constantly change. There's such a traumatic, a shift from one year to the next in terms of what people may understand, what's kind of commonplace knowledge, what is good and what is bad. Those things always kind of change and evolve over time. So using your ERGs to basically show them some things that maybe you're unsure about, or you just want feedback against, is a great way to just make sure that you're not putting content out in the world that negatively impacts the perception of your brand, or comes off as just out of touch or just insensitive, things like that. Because this stuff is always changing and evolving. And the best way to keep on top of things is really having somebody that is part of that community giving you that source of feedback for what you're putting out into the world.
Totally. And when it comes to activation and creating impact, can you tell us about the work that you've done with ERGs and what that looks like exactly?
Yeah, so the past two organizations, so Ancestry and then Electronic Arts, I've directly joined the Pride boards just to contribute. And I think that's something that I like to do. It's something I like to foster, talking about earlier in the conversation. I have that thing ingrained in my head where I'm like, I don't want anybody to go through what I went through when I was first entering the workforce. And I really want to sanction that and make sure there are those spaces for individuals, and we're really doing things right from an organizational perspective. I have been part of a lot of education in both of those organizations. I think that's really important. And one thing I want to say too is just like, I think everybody to this point, even if you're, living in a major city, you grew up around the gay community, I think everybody is pretty comfortable with the gay white male at this point. And I think a lot of things that I've helped with these organizations is talking about the broader spectrum of what creates our community, because there's a lot more than gay, right? There's a lot more things that are just being defined in the past few years. Maybe they didn't have a word for what people were experiencing and what they identified as. And I think being part of these ERGs, I really try to bring the focus and support, especially the trans community, the asexual community, these communities that are still experiencing really terrible hardships, both in the working environment and then out in the real world, or are underrepresented, or people just don't think about them or don't take them seriously. A lot of the work I think that sticks with me from these organizations has to do with like the Trans Day of Remembrance and Trans Day of Visibility, and just creating education for internal folk about how they could learn more, and just educating them and creating resources and bringing guest speakers that represent those communities and are relating their own trials and tribulations, the products that we're putting out into the world, to help hopefully change some minds internally within these organizations that may not be on board, or educate folk that just didn't know about these communities and these individuals and kind of what they were going through. So I think that's kind of where my mind goes when I think about some of the impacts I've hopefully left on some of these organizations and the support I've provided. And then we have some great stories of just like creating events. Ancestry, there was a really amazing event where we had somebody that we brought in to do a sort of mini TED Talk within the organization. And this individual talked about how he was able to use Ancestry's archives and all of the records to do research on his like great grandfather, and piece together that he was most likely gay, based off of kind of some of the records that he found pertaining to living situations and roommates, and like who he left kind of a lot of his possessions to when he passed away and things like that. And it was amazing to hear this queer gentleman kind of discover that, this relative of his that he had never met, wouldn't be able to meet, was part of the community through the product that, of an organization that we all represented. It was just such a nice moment. And to bring allies into that conversation, and to kind of use that as a sounding board to say, hey, there are certain features and capabilities that maybe we should be implementing into things like Family Tree Builder to better represent the larger community at hand, based off of this one gentleman's story, because he's able to find this out, but maybe he's not able to accurately represent, his great grandfather on the family tree because of limitations and capabilities in the actual platform itself. So that kind of sticks out to me. That was like a really great, rewarding moment during my time there.
That's incredible. Wow, that's incredible. So I know we talked a lot about, hiring best practices, having internal consultants from the walls inside, a little bit about, campaign work and product. But when it comes to these efforts, I think it can almost be impossible to affect actual change if the stakeholders you need to support you are not on board. So how do you approach this scenario and get leverage from upper management to make this happen?
Yeah, I think that falls into a lot of you executive leaders out there. Be an advocate, especially if you are part of the community. I know being involved in some of these things that people may consider extracurricular, it's not necessarily like let's say like quote unquote your day-to-day, but you are the folk that can actually speak to CEOs and some of those executives that are out of reach in certain cases for some of the people that are on the ground floor that really don't have that availability or that ability to communicate to these folk directly. I think there are a lot of great examples, outside of marketing tactics, how negative sentiment on companies kind of get out into the world and how they do impact sales numbers. Like I'm seeing it a lot in the gaming industry right now, right? I won't mention names, but I think everybody knows kind of some of the things that are going on. If you are doing things that maybe are a little unsavory or a lot unsavory, or just, are adamantly not supporting these communities, no matter how great your marketing tactics are, no matter how much money you're donating to organizations, if some of the folk on the top level are really going against those views, I think the public will know. We are in an age of information sharing, and public sentiment gets around, and it really does impact sales and things like that. I think that there is a tremendous responsibility for organizations to just kind of be aware of what they are supporting, what they should be supporting, and how it's not just not something they should only look at when, you know, things are in a bad place. That should be something that's just kind of on the ground floor, company support in general. And something that I think some of the companies out there could be doing a better job of. But it's an ongoing battle. It's an ongoing effort for sure.
Totally. I think we can all do a better job, but I mean, we've all seen brands who have been notorious for slapping a pride flag on their logo for the month of June, which is Pride Month, without any clear connection to the communities they claim to support. So I'm going to ask you, what are the do's and don'ts of marketing to LGBTQ plus audiences?
Yeah, it's a 365-day-a-year effort. It is not, you know, only in the month of June. People will notice that too. And I think one of the funniest things, like I noticed personally, is like July 1st when brands switch their rainbow pride logo back, because it usually shows that like on a lot of different social media platforms. And it's just like the funniest thing. It's like almost like maybe it was automated. They're like just set the end date for that. So not that specifically. I mean, it's okay if you, but the point I'm trying to make there is make sure that you are kind of doing things all throughout the year, major events throughout the year, supporting your communities, kind of doing things that aren't just during the month of June. And really raising awareness for some of those lesser known communities as part of the LGBTQ plus kind of ecosystem in the sphere, outside of, you know, just participating in the Pride Parade, because that is, to be honest, like that is a little bit of the lowest common denominator. And I think what people really are looking for as part of the community when they're supporting brands and things like that is what are you contributing to all throughout the year? What organizations are you as an organization contributing to? What programs do you have in place both inside your organization and then externally that are benefiting the community? What is your public stance when things happen internally, or you know, something happens where somebody is not supportive of the community or is adamantly against it? Like, as an organization, what is your stance? What is your general stance? And I think like Electronic Arts was a great kind of example of an organization that was just really outwardly communicative. Well, I would say internally and externally communicative about what they're doing to support the community. And we had some great executive leadership. Laura Miele was absolutely fantastic. And one of those people that you would see join Pride weekly, we have weekly Pride chats as part of our ERG. She would come in, she would participate, she would listen. Sometimes she would be vulnerable. It wasn't just during June, you know, and people, word of mouth is a thing. Like I talk to people about that all the time about, you know, executive leadership and what the brand represents, you know, during my time at the organization. And then when I leave, in conversations like this. So I think it's just one of those things where create that kind of dedicated effort, make sure that you are supporting these things. And, you know, the last chat, I was able to catch the last few minutes of that intersectionality, right? Like how are these different groups of underrepresented people outside of the LGBTQ plus community, but then also may fall in multiple categories? How are all of these groups working together? How are you as an organization supporting all of these different groups? And then really creating a space where, you know, it feels like you're authentically supporting that outside of, you know, rainbow overlay on top of your logo. And there have been similar things with other brands where it's like the whole black box thing that was done during the BLM protests, where it's just like, what did you do as an organization? Like you changed your picture for a couple of days, which actually added to the problem. But what did you do outside of that? Did you educate your employees internally? Did you create spaces to really talk to employees internally that were going through a rough time and saying like, how are you feeling? Because I think what people don't realize is like all of these things impact from a marketing, bring it back to marketing, the productivity of your teams, how they feel comfortable and happy. Like, you know, people are always going through tough times and things happen in the world. How are you addressing that as an organization? How are you talking to your employees and saying, yes, we understand this thing, this terrible thing happened. We are here for you. We are giving you time off to like kind of digest that. We are creating these spaces for you to talk about it. We are deploying benefits for you to talk to somebody if you need to. So I think there's so much of that sits outside of just like what ads you're putting out in the space that will impact the quality of life of your employees, the organic and authentic stories that you're telling, and then just over time you're doing good, it will actually benefit you as like an organization as well from a sales perspective. But the authenticity and finding people that truly care about those issues is where it starts. And leadership, hiring that leadership that
Totally.
really encourages that from the top down is so important as well.
Totally. I mean, we're speaking a lot about impact. And I know on our call, we discussed the importance of the actual product in this conversation. You spoke about how, and with your time at EA, you spoke about how the product encompasses the larger community and how that itself is not actually advertising, but it was the brand's ability to provide an experience for their consumers to be themselves in their own version. So can you elaborate on this initiative and tell us more about how you were able to keep the queer community in mind when it came to the actual external facing product?
Yeah, I love it. I'm a gamer nerd, so this is a very passionate topic of mine, and something that I'm really happy to see. We're not 100% there that as the gaming industry as a whole, but we're getting there, which is really great to see. Things like, I always give this example. When I first, I would say early on, I got into gaming. I think all of you that are familiar with the original Pokemon series for the Game Boy, you would go, as soon as you started the game, the first question that was asked of you by Professor Oak, which was kind of funny at the time, was like, I know you on a personal level. Why are you asking me this question? Are you a boy or are you a girl? This was a question, like one of the first questions you're asked in this game, and it would designate the appearance of your character and like kind of your pronouns throughout the game and things like that. But what we're seeing today is a lot of these gaming developers removing that restriction. And I think for a long time we saw with character creators, we have a lot of games that come out now where you create your own character. You are living your own experience in the game. I think a lot of people play game as an escapism kind of mechanism. You want to create this character that can be or maybe isn't a representation of you, but when you want it to be a representation of your true self, sometimes there are a bending of masculine and feminine traits and things that you don't want to be restricted on. So traditional gaming, are you a boy or a girl? If you're a boy, you get locked into certain hairstyles, you get locked into certain fashions, you get all this stuff is kind of excluded when you pick one of those two things. And what you're seeing now, and some things that EA has done a great job of with series like The Sims, I always use that. That's a great example of something where you can define and change and just be whatever you want in that world, is that those barriers are being broken down. And if you want a mustache and you want a ponytail, you can do that because that's how you express yourself. If you want to wear a skirt and you want to have big muscles, like you can do that because we shouldn't be putting restrictions on the characters people want to create. And I just love that now there isn't a limitation based off of that question at the beginning of the game. Are you a boy or girl? That's not even being asked anymore. It's just like create your character. And that's how it should be. You have all those resources available. You can do whatever you want. And that's what people want. And I think, we're seeing more and more of that. And then in terms of romantic relationships, we're not quite there. Some of the games are a little like restrictive still in terms of who you can romance, but I look at games like Mass Effect, I look at games like Dragon Age. You're starting to have more queer relationship options when there are kind of areas where you could romance specific characters. When you look in games, I'd say 5-10 years ago, a lot of them were very restrictive. Like, again, are you a boy or are you a girl? You're a boy, you can only romance the female characters. You're a girl, you can only romance the male characters. And now we're seeing that again being broken down, and you can romance not necessarily everybody yet, but like, they create a certain subset of characters that you can do same gendered relationships. And then it gets even more complex when you have characters coming out now in these games that are non-binary, which is amazing because it's still things that like I find people still don't quite fully understand when it comes to talking about gender. And just seeing the constant evolution of that, I have a lot of hope in the future. I think things will continue to evolve and change, but it's just been so refreshing as a gamer to have those restrictions being removed, in a lot of the games I'm playing today. So that's always great.
I love this conversation of brands doing it right. And I know on our call, we talked about Netflix and Asana. Can you tell us about those two brands and how you like what they're doing with their marketing efforts?
Yeah, so I first want to say I know there's some craziness going on Netflix right now, and then the whole David Chappelle fiasco. It's not okay what he said, and I think there should be further conversations and kind of things that they do as a brand to address that and potentially remove that from the platform. I don't agree with any of the sort of hate speech that's put out there. But from a content perspective, Queens Who Watch. So they do a really great series with two well-known drag queens in the community. It's content that's sponsored by Netflix of two drag queens watching kind of movies and shows that are available on Netflix. And I think it's such a great series that they put up on YouTube that promotes the product, but it's also a show that I want to watch, even if I'm not, how do I put it? It doesn't feel like an advertisement, right? Like it's pure content that I think is hilarious. I think it's great. And I really enjoy watching, whether or not Netflix had anything to do with it or not. But sometimes they're reviewing shows, and I'll go back and I'll watch some of those shows on Netflix. So it definitely does do its job. I think finding those nice mediums of putting out content into the world and embracing the community and partnering with folk that are part of the community, create great content that doesn't feel forced, or it doesn't feel, you know, necessarily specifically only one community will enjoy it. I think that's a great move that they made on their part. And then Asana, things like Asana. So a lot of you tech companies out there, Slack is another great example. Doing simple features within the platform itself. You may not like think of Slack and think of like, how are you giving back to the LGBT community from like Slack? But there are little things that you can do when you're creating user profiles, incorporating pronouns into the actual platform. So people don't have to kind of hodgepodge it together using kind of like what we experienced with LinkedIn a while ago before they actually put a pronoun feature in there. So little kind of tweaks to your tech, and that's my thing. It's ad tech and marketing tech. Your tech platforms can make all the difference. Those little subtle changes that maybe take a day or two to kind of implement. I'm probably underrepresenting the amount of time it takes to make those changes, but those simple changes actually could have a greater impact than you actually think. And it's not a massive feature overhaul. It's just a simple thing where you can add pronouns. So being really thinking about that, and then talking again, go back to your ERGs, go back to your career employees and ask them, like, what is some of the things in the product that you're using every day? Like, how could we make this a little bit more inclusive? And how could we make this more friendly to the larger communities? Maybe it's things that we're not thinking about, and they'll have that perspective. So definitely talk to your people for sure.
We have a ton of examples that we discussed today and tips surrounding how companies are approaching their B2C efforts from the inside out. But what about the B2B marketing approach? At the beginning of our session, you spoke about your time in sales, and there seems to be a lack of queer sale representatives, especially within tech companies. They tend to follow a very specific archetype. So I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about how B2B efforts are driven and how sales teams can better connect with their business leads and clients by simply just improving their diversity.
Oh, I love this so much because I can recall many times in my career where I've had a salesperson reach out, or I've gone out to dinner with somebody from the sales team, and they struggle to talk to me when they find out I'm a gay nerd. When you run out of the topics of like football and what are you and the wife doing? I've gotten that a lot too. Those are some of the examples I've got where somebody just assumes. It throws them for a loop, and sometimes it makes those kind of interactions a little awkward. And I've seen so many non-diverse sales teams. I think it's kind of a running gag in a lot of the tech sales communities of just like the specific archetype that typically is hired for those roles. But one thing that organizations should be very aware of, it's this tidal wave effect of now that as I'll say in the US, many parts of the world are more accepting to the communities, and you're getting top tier talent working their way through organizations. We're not quite there yet, but you're seeing it more and more where people at the helm of these companies and VP level and above are queer or are person of color or somebody in these subset communities. You need to start thinking about how are your sales teams representing and kind of understanding some of the people that they're talking to from a sales perspective, because a lot of times there's a lot of diversity in that realm. And when you're unprepared to kind of have those conversations, B2B is at its core a very human kind of interaction because you're reaching out to people within an organization. How are you better preparing your current sales team? And then how are you staffing them up to better accommodate those different types of interactions they'll be having with people that represent these companies and these organizations?
100%. Hi, Andrew.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Just
I do have, and if I can ask Jonathan one last thing.
go for it.
All right, I would love to end on this question because when we talk about the next generation of marketing leaders, I of course want to talk about the rising generation of queer leaders and how they can succeed in this new era. So Jonathan, what advice do you have for all of us?
Oh yeah, make time. So I know our day-to-days can be jam-packed full of Zoom meetings and things that pertain to the actual driving of the business from a numbers perspective. But those of you that are listening to this and you are in leadership positions, please dedicate that time to participating in ERGs, for sponsoring an ERG, for advocating on your hiring team to implement best practices that diversify your staff and make your current staff more comfortable. It can be additional work. It's an additional unpaid work, but it is so rewarding. And then the other thing I will say is recognize and celebrate your employees that are actively taking the time to participate in these functions within the organization. It's not something that they are directly paid for. It is something they are putting additional time into. Start giving them more leverage, start giving them more praise. Doesn't hurt to incorporate into the bonus allotment either, people that are really helping the organizations in these ways. Just put yourself out there and really start celebrating those that are adding those additional time and efforts to making the organization a better, more diverse place.